When you wake, your first thought isn't your own comfort. It's what's gone wrong in the night. A border skirmish, attacks unpaid, a quarrel between barons that could turn to war by dusk. Every dawn brings someone else's problem that somehow becomes your fault. And yet, when you act, when you finally decide, there's a strange, terrible thrill. You move a finger, and hundreds move with it. You speak, and the world rearranges itself.
Do you ever get used to that?
No, you never get used to it. You just get quieter about it. You learn to speak less and weigh each word like it's a blade, because it is.
You don't make it sound that appealing.
To be king is not what the songs tell you. It's not trumpets and tapestries and the smell of roast meat in the hall. Anyone who enjoys power doesn't understand it fully. Anyone who finds it appealing is a danger. Anyone who doesn't accept power reluctantly is a fool. Beware the man who longs to rule. He's already lost in his life the things he wants most.
And what is that?
Control.
Interesting. Henry, almost 900 years after your time on Earth, you're remembered for many things. But I'm curious, if you were to guess, what do you think you're remembered for most?
Strange thing. To ponder how one is remembered when all those who truly knew me lie dust and forgotten themselves. Guessing sits uneasy with me, but I'd wager folk remember the whole quarrel with Thomas Becket.
Yeah, that story is known to many, and I'd like to learn more about that. But another thing you're remembered for are the ideas you had about the law, ideas that many legal systems around the world have been greatly influenced by.
Well then, that gladdens me more than I'd let on in court.
I wonder, what are some of the things you implemented that you think may have endured?
I cannot say for certain. A man may build a wall in his lifetime, but he's not there to see if it stands through 100 winters, or if the ivy's pulled it down, or if the goats have shit on the stones. Still, there are things that I meant to last. In my day, folks still leaned heavily on trial by ordeal. Put your hand in the boiling pot, pull out a stone, and let God decide guilt whether you blister. Foolishness that the church clung to like a relic. What I did was start making room for something else. Men could come before royal justices and lay out their case with words, with reason. The new world, where we were heading, simply could not have gone on handling disputes by sword and fire and other nonsense.
Yeah, that example you gave, putting your hand in a boiling pot. Today, in any place with any semblance of organized civilization, that would be unthinkable.
Thank the stars for that. I'll tell you plainly, naught chilled me more than the sight of a frightened wretch, hands red and blistered, standing before a priest who squinted at the scabs like they were scripture. And all called that justice, as if our Lord spent his time causing infections to sort out petty land disputes. I never had much patience for such nonsense. Law ought to be anchored in reason, not superstition. I had to walk carefully. The church held ordeal close. Thomas Becket, God blind me, he'd rather see a man scalded by the hand of God than judged by the hand of a king. But I pressed on where I could. I built the courts, sent my justices out, made it so folks could settle their disputes with argument and evidence. Less fire, more thought. So if your age finds the ordeal unthinkable, then I reckon we did something right, me and those who came after, and didn't tear it all down.
Give me some other examples on how a dispute or a crime would be handled before you were king?
England was a patchwork of customs, each shire with its trials by ordeal. A man might be bound and lowered into a river. If he floated, he was guilty. If he sank, he was innocent. God's justice, they said. Another was the red-hot iron. Innocence was proven if it could be carried at a set distance, as if innocence and withstanding pain were related.
Brutal.
It was.
And just so irrational. It's hard to wrap my head around how anyone, whether 90 years ago or 900, could believe justice could be reached in this way. I wonder if I could speak to the most intelligent, articulate proponent of these practices, what would they say?
If you could speak to the most intellectual of cleric, barons, or village elders, they would not stumble for words. They'd say, "Justice is not man's alone to give, it belongs to God. And since no mortal may know all things, we call upon divine judgment to reveal the truth. If he be innocent, the Lord shall preserve him. If he be guilty, his flesh shall confess it." They would tell you, man's justice is frail, corruptible, prejudiced. But the Almighty sees all, even the secrets buried in a man's soul.
It was an act of faith.
Yes, as barbaric as it seems to you and myself.
The number of people wrongly accused, punished, even killed, using methods that even a 5-year-old would know better of in the name of any god. It's just so absurd.
The child's heart sees clearer than a proud man's eyes.
Was there a specific moment in time when you thought there was a better way, or did it just build gradually over time?
That's a thoughtful question. I'll not pretend it struck me like lightning. It was a pattern, seen plainly over time. The crown was little more than a broken helm, barons building castles like wolves marking territory, churchmen making their own rules. Everywhere I rode, folk told me the same. The law is what the strong man says it is. And that, my friend, curdled my blood. So I began laying down tracts, royal writs, travelling justices, standard pleas. Nothing too bold at first, but over time I shaped it into a system. One realm, one law. Not perfect, but steadier than what had come before. And, truth be told, I found I liked the work. Order pleased me. Structure calmed my mind more than the Psalms ever did.
And did you have a teacher or someone that you studied who helped inform your early ideas on law and justice?
My mother, Empress Matilda, was the fiercest mind I ever knew. She'd studied at the imperial court in Germany, saw Roman law debated by men in long robes and longer memory. She'd speak of Justinian's code now and then, not to teach me outright, but in her manner of challenging me. A prince should know more than his sword's edge, she'd say. He should know what binds a man to peace. I listened, even when I scowled.
What was your education like?
Tutors from the church, mostly. They droned on about canon law, saints and councils and such. But hidden in all that were the bones of process. Later on I leant on men like Ranulph de Glanville, my chief justiciar. He helped me give shape to the common law, drew up one of the earliest law books in the realm. He took the musings and mess I'd made and gave it legs to stand on. If I had one guiding star, it was this. A kingdom must be held not just by fear, but by fairness. And fairness requires structure. That I came to on my own.
A kingdom must be held not just by fear, but by fairness. That leaves plenty of room for fear.
Aye, it does, and rightly so. Do not mistake me for a dreamer, friend. I wore the crown in an age where softness bred rebellion, and mercy, too oft given, was read as weakness. A king without fear is a king without a throne. The barons test you, your own sons betray you, and the church waits like a cat for you to blink.
Hearing you talk about the way things were, it seems like any pragmatic approach to justice must have been completely revolutionary. Is that how it was received?
Not because men hadn't thought of fairness before, but because few with power had ever tried to build it into the bones of a kingdom.
Hmm.
Most lords cared for their rights, not for justice. The church cared for power and souls, not settlements. And the people? Well, they'd been taught to expect little and endure much. So when I began speaking of a more predictable justice, it certainly raised brows. They called it meddling, said I was taking from the nobility and handing it to the peasantry. Some scoffed, some schemed. Some feared I meant to strip them of their ancient privileges, and truth be told, of course I did.
I like the term predictable justice. If the rules and their enforcement are not predictable, how can you expect anyone to follow the rules?
Well, that's the very spine of law. Strip it away, and all you've got is the whim of the mighty. If a man doesn't know what law binds him, or worse, if he knows it can change with the wind, with the mood of the judge or the purse of his rival, then he'll not trust it. He'll not respect it. He'll skirt it when he can, defy it when he must. But when law is steady, then a man can shape his life around it. He knows what will bring punishment and what won't. He knows what claim he may make and how. And those enforcing the law can do so more effectively, knowing the people are aware of the law and the repercussions of breaking it. Impossible without predictability.
It's daunting to think of what it took to implement this kind of consistency.
Aye, it was nigh impossible, but there were many parts to it.
All right, if we can, let's go one at a time.
First, I made the law the king's business. I didn't ask permission. I declared justice, real justice, was part of the king's peace. That meant all serious matters were not just offences against an individual. They were offences against the crown itself, against the king's peace. That was the start.
Wow. To your knowledge, had anyone had that idea before? I live in a country that didn't exist in your lifetime, but it's one of the richest and most powerful countries in the world. And serious crimes are tried as the accused versus the people, meaning the people at large, rather than the alleged victim.
Now, kings before me claimed royal pleas, crimes so grave they disturbed the king's peace. But it was uneven. Some kings let the barons or sheriffs handle it, or turned a blind eye so long as the taxes kept coming in. I took what was a trickle and made it a torrent. I said, murder, theft, arson, rape, these offend not just the victim, but the realm itself. And since the king is the realm made flesh, they offend me.
The idea that the victim isn't the victim, but the king is, it's a radical idea. What else was important?
I couldn't be everywhere, so I put justices on the move. These were travelling royal justices, trained in the crown's thinking, sent with a seal and authority to hear pleas in every shire. They weren't beholden to local lords. Their judgments weren't random. They carried precedent in their written records, and they applied it. Same case, same ruling, no matter if it was Sussex or Stafford.
And these traveling judges had the authority to make binding judgments on your behalf.
They did, fully and without flinching. When I sent my justices, they carried the full weight of the crown. They judged in my name, under my seal, and their word was law, same as if I'd spoken it from the throne in Winchester.
And what if the lords or landowners didn't honor the verdicts made by your judges?
If a lord refused the king's court, sheriff dragged his feet, I'd send men, armed ones. And if a bishop wagged his finger, I'd wag back, with taxes, threats, or worse.
How much worse?
Whatever was needed to protect the rule of law. If threats and taxes didn't bend a man, I'd break him. Sometimes it meant seizing a lord's lands outright, stripping his titles, his rights, his revenue. Other times it meant a castle dungeon. And if the offence was grave enough, it could mean death. The law would not be mocked.
And this was at the root of your issue with Thomas Becket, who you mentioned earlier. But before telling me about your conflict with him, tell me about him.
Thomas. Let me speak of him plainly, before the sorrow clouds it. Thomas Becket was the son of a merchant, not noble by blood, but as clever as the day is long, tall, sharp of face, sharp of tongue, ambitious, aye, but with a kind of charm that made you forgive it. I took him into my service as Chancellor of England 1 year after I took the throne. He had studied law in Bologna, and he knew how to manage court. He could squeeze tax from a lord without spilling wine on his cloak. I liked that. And more than that, I liked him, truly. We'd hunt together, feast together, argue over policy like boys squabbling over chess. He was my friend. I trusted him more than my kin.
Would you say you loved him?
Like a chosen brother.
The Chancellor of England sounds important.
Aye, he was the keeper of the king's seal, and the voice of the crown when I could not speak. He had authority, and wielded it like a sword. His was the second most powerful post in the kingdom.
And he stays Chancellor for how long?
About 7 years. Then the Archbishop of Canterbury died.
That's the head of the English Church.
Aye, every bishop, every abbot, every monk, every clerk, they all looked to him.
So the Archbishop dies.
And I see an opportunity. I thought, if I place Thomas there, we'll have harmony between the church and the crown. He's my man. He'll wear the mitre, but keep his loyalties straight.
And we've touched on this, but just to make sure I completely understand, describe the tension between the church and the crown.
Well, the Archbishop doesn't answer to the king. He answers to the Pope. The church has its own courts, its own laws. Canon law, we call it, a world apart. Even the humblest clerk could claim benefit of clergy and escape the king's justice.
Meaning they could be tried in church courts outside of your jurisdiction.
It meant thousands lived by church law, not mine. A priest could kill a man and be unreachable to the crown.
I see.
I believed that if Thomas were to become archbishop, then crown and church could move in concert, like two oxen yoked to the same plough.
I see. So does he take the post?
He tried to talk me out of it, warned me of his first allegiance as archbishop would be to God, not to me. But I laughed it off. I pressed him, the bishops, and even Rome. He accepted with reluctance. He was ordained one day, concentrated archbishop the next. He gave up the chancellorship, the feasts, his comforts. He even took to fasting and sleeping on the stone floor. He still called me my lord, but there was a new firmness in him. The friend I knew was gone.
What happened next?
I introduced reforms, the constitutions of Clarendon. They laid out clear as day that the crown, not the church, held ultimate authority in all legal matters. To Thomas, it was an affront to the church's independence. As chancellor, he served me with zeal. As archbishop, he served God with the same fire. Only now his loyalty had turned.
So your closest ally becomes your biggest adversary, practically overnight. And when does the pot boil over?
After years of defiance, letters to Rome, stirring trouble in France, I'd had enough. Then, in 1170, he excommunicated my bishops. In England, on my soil. One night, surrounded by barons and knights, pacing like a caged wolf, I finally let my fury loose. "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" I called. I remember it well, but it was a throwaway cry, a curse spat in anger. It wasn't a command, not in my mind. But 4 of my knights took it as marching orders. They rode to Canterbury without my leave. They found Becket in the cathedral, unarmed and unguarded. He refused to bar the door. He welcomed martyrdom like a man greeting judgment. The knights demanded he submit to the king. He refused, and they drew their swords. And there, before the altar, in the very house of God, they struck him down. They split his skull, spilled his brains upon the stone.
I really don't know what to say. It's a tragedy.
I won't pretend I wept on the spot. But when word reached me, I felt a sickness in my bones I'd not known before. I didn't order the killing, but I was the cause of it. But to humble myself in penance, I walked barefoot through the streets of Canterbury, stripped of all ceremony. I entered the cathedral. I knelt at the place where Thomas's blood still marked the stones, and I let the monks there flog me. 80 lashes.
Sounds like a scene from a book. It's hard to imagine a king subjecting himself to this.
An ordinary king wouldn't subject himself to such a thing. But I was not an ordinary king, and Becket was not an ordinary martyr.
Have you ever asked an American how he or she feels about the business of voting? If you have, it's probably given you a whole new slant on the matter. To those men and women who were born in other countries, the right to vote is a precious privilege, and they line up before the voting booth on Election Day with the same high sense of pride and responsibility that one might feel upon being awarded some rare degree. Actually, the right to vote should give us all the same heady thrill. It is we, you and I, who determine the course of our country and the conditions of our own lives with those votes we cast on Election Day. Just one reminder, make sure your opinions will be counted. Make sure you cast your vote by being very sure to register. Registration days differ in varying localities. Check on the time in your community and get your name on the rolls. Then take advantage of all of America's media of communication for informing yourself on the issues involved. And then when Election Day comes, go to the polls with pride and responsibility and vote.
Truth Serum is a podcast with sponsorship opportunities you'll scarcely find anywhere else. Wish to spread your message far and wide? Simply point your browser to truthserumproject.com/sponsor. Truth Serum is a place where the most influential minds in history can react to the latest and greatest products and services. Just visit truthserumproject.com/sponsor. And for brands with a proud history and heritage of their own, we bring back timeless ads from yesteryear. Or if all parties are aligned, you may receive an endorsement from the host of the show himself. Again, that's truthserumproject.com/sponsor. Get on the right side of history with your advertisement on Truth Serum.
Earlier, you mentioned your own sons betraying you. What happened there?
I had 4 sons who lived to manhood. Henry, Richard, Geoffrey, and John. Each one born with ambition. I gave them land, titles, promise. I thought I was building a dynasty, a chain of strong links to carry the crown forward for generations. Instead, I raised a nest of falcons that turned their talons on their own father.
How did they turn on you?
My sons, led by young Henry, the one I'd crowned as my successor, rose against me. They were joined by their mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, and backed by my enemies, the King of France, the King of Scotland, a swarm of barons who just saw their chance.
Their mother, meaning your wife. Was she queen?
She was queen, not just in name, but in every sense that matters. She championed our sons' claims, especially Richard's, and when the Great Rebellion rose in 1173, she sided with them.
While you were still married.
We were still married. In the eyes of the church, the bond held. There was no annulment, no formal break. Husband and wife we remained, even as we became rivals across a battlefield.
Wow. So unusual. Were you ever in love with her, or was your union a political agreement?
Well, at the start it was both, but let me not lie to you. I did love her, fiercely, but of course it was a political arrangement, to be sure. She was the Duchess of Aquitaine, the most sought-after heiress in Europe. Her lands stretched from the Loire to the Pyrenees. By wedding her, I gained a prize no sword could win.
How does it get to the point where she sides with your sons and enemies to defeat you?
The root, it was this. Eleanor would not be ruled, and I could not bear to share rule. I did not ask, I commanded, and Eleanor, she was used to leading men, not obeying them. And she feared I would divide the inheritance poorly, or worse, not at all, that I'd pit brother against brother to keep them dependent on me. Of course, she was right to fear that.
And your sons, they wanted more power than you were willing to relinquish?
They didn't just want inheritance. They wanted it while I still breathed. And when they realized I wouldn't hand it over, they turned to force. So they rose, and I crushed them. But the cost? I won the war and lost my sons one by one. In the end, none of us got what we wanted.
Henry, between your wife, your children, and Becket, it seems everyone closest to you ends up your enemy. Could that be a coincidence? You are the common thread. I'm wondering what responsibility lies with you.
That's a fair question, and you strike to the bone. You're right. I am the thread that runs through all of their stories. One by one they turned, and I, so certain, so righteous, branded each of them traitor in turn. But the betrayal was not theirs alone. So, since we've lit these candles, and we're in this strange but free and open space together, let me speak plainly. I bear blame. I used people. I chose them for what they could do, not always for who they were. I made Thomas Becket Chancellor because he was useful. I made him Archbishop because I saw a tool to bend the church towards my vision. I treated Eleanor as a duchess to be added to my ledger, not as a partner in rule. And my sons, I raised them to be kings. I gave them titles and then withheld power. I drove them to rebel. I was the architect of my own loneliness.
That must be painful to say.
It is painful. More than I have ever allowed myself to say in life. A king doesn't often speak of loneliness. Not to his court. Not even to himself. But here, with no crown on my head and no need for pretense, you hear regret in my words.
I have a theory developing here. And that is, I wonder if being born into royalty, to be the heir to a throne, or to be seen and treated as different than other human beings, or to be exalted, feels kind of like a setup. Truth is, you're just one of billions of human beings who've roamed the earth no better than anyone else. But your experience tells you otherwise. This myth of superiority, it seems it must be related to your relationships with the people you love most breaking.
You speak the greatest truth, friend, and I hear it. Strange though it sounds to ears trained on praise.
Would I have been in trouble for saying that to you in England in the 1100s?
Deep enough to need a fast horse. To say to a king, you are no more special than any other man. In public, in my court, before the barons, the bishops, the scribes, that would have been seen as sedition. To question the divine order was to question both crown and church.
Even though deep down you know it's the truth.
Aye, not in the noise of court, not when men bowed and the air was thick with incense and flattery. In those moments, I wore the role like armor, lived inside it, but in the quiet, alone, after a campaign soaked through with mud and doubt, yes, I knew.
Fascinating. On one hand, you're a king who gains enormous power through the randomness of birth, really nothing to do with fairness or merit. And as king, you have such a strong reaction to the unfairness you see in the world. It's such an interesting paradox.
It is strange, isn't it? I knew deep in my bones that my own station in life was a fluke of womb and war. But I couldn't change the fact that men ruled without deserving it. So I reconciled it in this way. If I had no right to the throne by merit, then I'd earn my place by what I left behind. And if, centuries from now, you're still speaking of law, of fairness, of courts that outlive kings, then perhaps that was enough.
Henry, I'd like to get back to some of the legal ideas you had. I'd like to start with juries. You introduced juries, correct?
I did.
What was their role in your legal system?
A juror was a well-known local man, freeborn and lawful. When summoned, he took a sacred oath to speak truth to what he knew.
He didn't judge arguments or weigh testimony.
No, For example, if two men disputed a piece of land, the court would call a jury. We called it a recognition, usually 12 men. These jurors would be asked plainly, who held this land? Who held it 10 years ago? Was it taken unlawfully? What is the custom in this place?
So they're people of some standing who are researching and discovering the facts of the case as best they can.
That's well put.
And who are they bringing their findings and conclusions to?
One of my circuit judges riding through the shires. They would hold court in my name. The jurors would be summoned before him, and under oath they would deliver their answers.
And was there voting amongst the jury, or they just gave their reports and the royal justice made the verdict?
The jury did not vote. They would confer among themselves quietly, sometimes in the presence of the sheriff or one of the watch of the court, and then they would declare a single answer.
An answer meaning what happened, not guilty or not guilty, just the facts.
Just the facts.
And if a consensus on what happened couldn't be reached, what happened?
That was rare but troublesome. The court might call a new jury, but often pressure was applied to bring the jurors into agreement. Justice needed an answer, and from there, the judge, with knowledge of the law, custom, and royal command, gave a ruling.
And the 12 jurors, do they all come at it from a neutral position? Or are any of them set out to discover on behalf of one side of the argument?
They were sworn to speak the truth, not to favor one side. Their duty was not to argue a cause, but to testify together what could be discovered among them. They were chosen for their knowledge.
Interesting. Well, almost 1,000 years later, the jury system in England today still uses 12 jurors. My country as well.
Given the time that has passed, this is truly a wonder to me.
It really is remarkable. However, the jurors are used differently. In today's courts, 12 ordinary people, strangers to each other and to the case, are chosen to hear both sides present their arguments. They don't investigate or speak during the trial. They simply listen. Afterward, they go to a private room and they're asked to reach a unanimous decision on whether the accused is guilty or not guilty, based solely on the evidence they've heard.
No lord, no justice, no bishop delivers the judgment, only they?
That's correct.
The jurors are the judges? God's wounds.
God's wounds indeed. Yes, in criminal cases, they make the judgment. And you need all 12 to agree on guilt. Otherwise, no conviction.
It's hard to think of it. They listen, not to what they know, but to information presented by others. And all 12, with this burden to reach consensus? I worry too many of the guilty would be set free. I'd wager you get your share of blundered verdicts. You've just moved the blame from the judge to the 12. Strange to me. Yet I do see the wisdom of protecting the accused.
Another thing I think you'll find interesting, both sides of the case has a person or a group of people we call lawyers. Lawyers advocate solely on behalf of one side of the argument, either for the people or the accused.
Now that's a turn I didn't see coming. So in your time, each side, the accuser and the accused, has a trained speaker.
Yes, a lawyer.
And the lawyer's sole purpose is to argue on behalf of one side. Not to find the truth, but to advocate, to persuade, to cast doubt, to convince the 12 jurors.
Yes, exactly.
God's eyes, what a remarkable thing. In my reign, there were legal advocates, an informal and unremarkable part of it wasn't even part of the process.
Were they trained or licensed in any way?
Gods, no. He may have a sharp tongue, know a bit of Latin, and could navigate the customs of the court. He might stand and plead the case.
Sounds a little bit like a lawyer. A small part of your legal system, perhaps, but an idea that blossomed into a fundamental right in many countries, the right to an attorney.
I marvel at the thought.
So in your system, you have 12 people trying to discover the truth and come to a consensus of what happened. Then a judge decides in favor of one side or another. In our system, it's almost like no one is really in pursuit of the truth. They're in pursuit of winning their own argument. And we trust that those forces, pulling in opposite directions, will bring the truth to the forefront for 12 silent jurors to see clearly. It's fascinating to think about which way is better. And I've never thought of it this way, but it's interesting that in my time, you have a judge, 12 jurors, and lawyers on each side, and collectively they're in pursuit of the truth. But individually, really, no one is.
Now that is a powerful reckoning. You've laid it bare, friend. It does sound a touch mad. Your world trusts the two opposing sides, each with their own interest, each tugging with full force, will somehow uncover the truth by friction, that the heat of battle will burn away the falsehoods. You're right to marvel at it.
Are you familiar with the word democracy?
No, I do not recognize the word at all.
Democracy is one system of government where the people choose who leads them. They vote for their leaders who are meant to serve the will of the people they represent.
God's bones! That's a kind of alchemy I can barely grasp. How is it not endlessly contested?
It is.
And surely it must be madness.
It can be. Do you think it's a good idea?
The thought of it frightens me. The people aren't always wise. They can be stirred by fear, flattered by liars, blinded by rage. I've seen crowds chant for blood with no thought of justice.
Can't the same be said for kings, queens, and lords?
Aye, but of course. But with a king, you have a chance of getting one who is just, or one who is just raving mad. The mob is hardly ever just.
Do you think there's any wisdom in people getting what they bargained for? Good, bad, or indifferent, the people having the opportunity to sleep in the bed they make for themselves.
I suppose. While there's wisdom in consequence, the rightful question is, could such a system lead to order, and if so, for how long?
Well, most civilized nations today are not ruled by kings or queens. The people choose their leaders, and if the leaders don't answer to the people, they'll likely be replaced. In England, it began with noblemen forcing limits on royal power. Your grandson experienced this. Over time, parliaments gained strength, kings lost absolute rule, and voting rights were expanded. In England today, the monarchy only exists as a symbol. The true power lies with elected officials, bound by laws and accountable to voters. No one rules by divine right anymore, not even the king.
This is not a world I ever imagined. Not even in the deepest corners of doubt or dream. I bristle at the sheer audacity of it. It feels like a funeral for my world. And yet, I do feel a sense of pride. Difficult as all this is for me to imagine, it is a triumph of the very notion of the rule of law.
For almost 2 centuries, Americans have enjoyed the valuable privileges of freedom. Now, freedom needs each American to dedicate himself to its preservation. We must not allow our liberties to be endangered by neglect of our duties as citizens. During this year of rededication, join with your fellow Americans in reaffirming the principles on which this country is founded and the safeguarding of those principles. Make it your business to see that federal, state, and local governments are conducted honestly. Help to maintain the good morale of your sons and daughters in the armed forces. Learn the facts about all candidates and issues. Then vote for the one you believe in. Guard your American heritage of freedom. It needs you.
Henry, I mentioned my country earlier. It's one of the most prosperous and powerful in the history of the world. And we have all sorts of laws, but the most famous among them are called the Bill of Rights.
The Bill of Rights.
Yes. It's a list of 10 guarantees that limit the government's power over the people.
And what do these Bill of Rights say?
Like I said, there are 10 of them. I was thinking I'd quickly explain the first 5, and you can give me the first thought that comes to your mind.
Go on, then.
Okay, number 1, freedom of speech. People can worship as they choose. They can speak their minds without government retribution, and they're free to gather to protest.
God's teeth. This is an open invitation to rebellion. Give a man leave to curse his rulers, and he'll do it with glee. Let every priest, poet, and drunkard think their voice equal. You'll have noise, not order. Still, I admire the courage of it. Noble, perhaps, but surely dangerous. And in my time, it would have been madness. Perhaps it is in yours.
Some might agree with that. But is the value of each person's voice not, in fact, equal?
Oh, not in my world, and I dare say not in yours, if you were to reflect on it. A shepherd's voice is not a bishop's. A drunkard's voice is not a judge's. And a man who spent his life studying law or statecraft, his word should weigh heavier than one who's done neither. That's not cruelty, it's sense.
Number 2, the right to bear arms. We have very advanced weapons called guns. They project lethal metal bullets with a simple pull of a trigger. This law protects people's right to own them.
These weapons can kill a man with a simple twitch,
Yes, that's right.
and anyone may own them.
Almost any adult.
Christ's blood! That's not liberty, that's a tinderbox. This one truly unnerves me.
Number 3, the government may not force people to house soldiers.
Now that one I can understand.
Hmm.
Billeting soldiers in private homes breeds resentment fast. Force a farmer to share his hearth with armed men, and you'll make an enemy of him. The law speaks to a deeper truth. A man's home is his stronghold.
Number 4, protection from unreasonable searches. This means officials can't barge into homes or seize property without good cause or a warrant.
Now there's a clause I'd have liked to write myself. Not far from what I began with the royal writs. Standardized commands, sealed by the king, so no one could claim authority they didn't hold. This one's sound, very sound indeed.
Number 5, due process for the accused. No one can be forced to confess innocence or guilt. They can't be tried twice for the same crime or punished without following proper legal procedures.
I cannot help but swell with pride. The idea that no man may be punished without lawful process. That I fought hard for.
So the most objectionable to you were the first 2. Interestingly enough, they're the ones people are most passionate about as well. I think for many, the right to speak freely and having the means to defend that freedom strike at the very heart of what it means to be free.
Aye, but do people want to be free? Or do they want to be safe?
I've never thought about those as mutually exclusive. I think both. What do you think?
I think they want predictability, protection, a sense that someone stands between them and the storm. They say they want freedom, but what they truly crave more often than not is order, a world that makes sense, A place where their labor bears fruit, their children are fed, and they can sleep without fearing what knocks in the dark. Do they want to be ruled? Not in name, but in function? I would say most do.
Well, I don't want to be ruled, I don't think.
You'd have made a difficult subject in my day. You say, I don't want to be ruled. And yet, you live by rules. Someone sets them. Someone enforces them. That you've been given say in who that someone is does not mean you are not ruled.
Oh, man. I'm going to be thinking about that for a while.
Then my time with you was not wasted. A thought that lingers is better than one that flatters.
Your ideas were so far ahead of their time. It's fascinating to learn about people who look at the way things are and they think, this is broken. There's got to be a better way. I want you to take a hard look at Western civilization and answer this. What do you see today that gives you that same feeling? Another way to ask is, what are we doing now that is as barbaric as trial by ordeal?
When coin can buy better counsel, longer delays, softer scrutiny, then justice is no longer blind. She's counting the purse. In my day, a noble might escape punishment for deeds that would see a peasant hanged. And I hated it. I tried to temper that, made royal justice reach further, made it harder to hide behind title or land. But you've replaced titles with bank accounts. And when two men stand accused, the one with coin walks taller, does he not? He hires clever advocates and crafts a better story, while the poor man is hurried through and offered a bargain in place of a trial. If wealth can tilt the verdict, then justice is not being done. It is being sold.
Wow. Henry, what was it like being on Truth Serum?
This was unlike any engagement of my life. There was no fight, no parchment to sign, no threat to wield, just your questions, and the quiet terror of answering them honestly.
I'm wondering if there's one more thing that you never said out loud in life, but you'll say now.
That I envied the ordinary man. Not for his poverty, nor his struggle. God knows I saw the weight he carried, but for the simplicity of his heart.
Henry, do you have any questions for me?
In this democracy you speak of, do the people who seek positions of leadership serve the people, or merely flatter them to win favor?
Well, Well, everyone knows what it means to speak like a politician. It's not a compliment. It kind of means you're saying what people want to hear in a way that is agreeable, but not quite honest or authentic. Something kings would probably never have to worry about. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're not trying to serve the people. I think the truth is there are some that are in it for the power and some who are motivated to serve, and most probably somewhere in between.
A thoughtful answer, measured, and indeed I respect that. My power came first, and then I had to prove I was worthy of it. Pandering to gain power has never come to my mind. But your leaders, they must charm first and then rule. Surely that's a strange inversion, is it not?
It's a really good observation.
Another question I have. If history has given more power to the people, I'm wondering if the weight of the responsibility is taken seriously. Have people become more aware, or wiser, to rise to the privilege of having their voices heard?
Another really good question. I think privilege is a really good word choice. And there's no doubt we take it for granted to a degree. It's just such a normal part of life. But when I step into a voting booth, I do feel it's a privilege.
A voting booth?
Yeah, a voting booth is where we vote. It's a private space. We vote for our leaders in private. But I want to get back to your question, have we become wiser to rise to the responsibility? And I don't know what to compare it to. I think it probably makes people more opinionated, but you certainly don't need to be wise to have an opinion.
Well, you've given me much to consider, friend. You see, in my day, men bled for less than a voice. A whisper of dissent might cost a tongue. Yet here you are, stepping into a booth, not a battlefield. No sword drawn, no herald. People forging their own future in silence. That quiet is hard won. You must never forget that.
Henry, we've discussed a lot here, but I want to make sure that I understand, after hearing about the impact you had on the world and on the legal system, just what it feels like to hear that these ideas you had ripple through time.
I feel humbled to know the world went on without me, and yet something of me remained. I never sought legacy, I sought order. I'm also surprised. I am a man who failed those closest to him. Eleanor, a lost love. Sons, only by blood. Thomas. God help me, Thomas Becket. To be remembered for striving towards fairness, though I was not always fair myself. After the ruin I wrought in my own life, perhaps I've earned a measure of the mercy I never showed myself. To know that even in that wreckage, something right took root, that is more than I could have asked. That is what every leader should hope for. Not statues or songs, not even adoration, but a shadow that stretches long enough to shield someone who will never know your name.
Next on Truth Serum, Gautama Buddha.